Hey everybody, it's low carb keto friendly nutritionist Amy Berger from 2itnutrition.com bringing you another installment in doing keto without the crazy. Before we get down to business, just a reminder that there's a link below to my recently released ebook called The Stall Slayer. You can find that at stallslayer.com, and it is about exactly what it sounds like it's about: breaking fat loss stalls on low carb or ketogenic diets. If you've been eating low carb and keto and you are doing everything right and that stubborn body fat will not budge and you don't know why, do check out the Stall Slayer because your answer is probably in there. Feedback has been coming in for the book, lots of really positive feedback. People are liking it, already finding it helpful, so thank you. All right, what else? Okay, just a warning, this is going to be a long video. This is probably going to go at least an hour. It's been a while since I had one this long, but that's what she said. It's been a while since I had one this long, but this is a big topic and I don't want to gloss over anything. And it is a viewer request, so I do take requests. If you have a topic you'd like me to cover, don't leave a comment below because I probably won't see it in a timely manner. You can either, well, the best way to do it is to contact me. I'll put the contact link down below. You can contact me via stallslayer.com. There's a little contact form. Okay. Also, before we get into today's topic, I am indulging in a little adult beverage. I hope that doesn't offend anyone's tender sensibilities. It's not going to be a regular practice for me on my videos, but I had a very long day, and I'm pointing over there because that's where I sit when I write. You know, I've mentioned my sort of paid gig day work writing that pays the bills, and I don't love it. It's not terribly fulfilling. It's not terribly satisfying, but in the interest of expressing gratitude for the things in life that really are useful to us and helpful to us, I'm so grateful to have it. I know that this virus situation has affected so many people, maybe some of you very severely. You know, you've lost a job, you've lost a business, your livelihood is in jeopardy. So I don't love all that sort of day-to-day paid gig work that I do, but it pays the bills, it's not going anywhere, it's very steady, it's reliable, and so I'm very grateful to have it. And it gives me the flexibility to have time to make videos. So how great is that? So cheers to that job. Cheers to you for tuning in. This glass, you won't really be able to see it on the video. You see that little paw print? This is from a winery. This was the souvenir glass from the tasting we did at Chateau Morisset. It's thedogs.com. Actually, they're all about dogs. So their website is thedogs.com. I will put a link. It's in the southern part of Virginia. And it's in a town called Floyd. It's a beautiful place to spend an afternoon when the world gets back to normal and you can go spend a Saturday or Sunday there and get some wine and chill. My boyfriend and I went there just before everything closed. We didn't know that was coming, so we kind of just serendipitously timed it right. And it's a small glass, so don't judge me, and it's only, you know, maybe 2/3 full. And I happen to be drinking a Chenin Blanc from South Africa. They do make wine in South Africa, and Chenin Blanc is one of my favorite whites. I prefer red, but I'm an equal opportunity wine lover. We're not a wine racist. We love red and white, and just depends on what I'm in the mood for. So, cheers. And anyway, I'm drinking because it was a long day of sitting in front of that computer writing stuff, and I just needed to take the edge off. And getting to the topic at hand, because it is not unrelated to my day job writing, we're talking about berberine. Berberine is a viewer request. This was a viewer request topic, and to the person who requested this, I hope you're still watching my channel because you requested this like 8 months ago. And I always knew it was a good idea. I always planned to get to it. The reason it took me so long to get to it is because I knew that I had a lot to say, and I didn't want to, you know, half-ass it. And one of the perks, one of the nice things about that sort of paid writing that I do is that just in the course of the things they assign me to write about, I have to learn about and research a lot of things that I wouldn't have chosen to look at on my own. All kinds of different supplements, all kinds of different phytochemicals, vitamins, minerals, different amino acids, you know, you name it. I may have learned about it just because it was an assignment they gave me and I had to do it. So I have written and read a lot about berberine, and I knew that I'd written and read a lot about berberine, and I was going to want to cite some of the studies. And so that's why I was putting this off, because I needed to carve out some time to reread those studies so I could tell you the good stuff. Now, I don't have any notes except what I want to read you from some of these studies, so I may like pause every now and then to get my thoughts together. What is berberine, and why are we even talking about it? Berberine is sometimes called herbal metformin. And some of you probably take metformin. Some of you know exactly what it is. If you've never heard of it, metformin is a drug. It's a pharmaceutical drug used for type 2 diabetes. It's used to help control blood sugar. Now, because of the effect of blood sugar and insulin on so many other things, they also use metformin sort of off-label for PCOS, even for like erectile dysfunction, and I think some other stuff. But I've done videos and blog posts on all of that stuff, including the fact that they use a diabetes drug for PCOS and erectile dysfunction. So the researchers and the doctors clearly know that those things are at least related in some part to glucose and insulin, but I digress. They call berberine herbal metformin because, according to the research I've seen, berberine is pretty darn impressive. It is just about as good as metformin. So considering you can get berberine over the counter, you don't need a prescription, it's just a supplement, for it to be that powerful is really impressive. And let me kind of lay the groundwork before I get into the details. The research really has shown it to be nearly as effective in terms of reducing blood sugar, keeping insulin levels lower, even lowering triglycerides, all these beneficial metabolic effects we would expect or we would want to see. And I guess first I have to teach you a little bit about using the word significant. I can't really speak to what goes on in other countries or in other languages when they may translate these studies or publish their own research. But in America, America and Canada, you know, when we use English, and I guess the UK, whatever. Sorry, trying not to discriminate against any English-speaking country, Australia, Ireland, all good. When scientific studies use the word significant, it doesn't mean the same thing that you and I typically use it for in our normal everyday street language. When we use the word significant, you and I, significant usually means big or large, right? If you lose 100 pounds, wow, you lost a significant amount of weight, right? Let's say you get a promotion at work and your income has just increased $25,000 a year. Wow, you got a significant raise. When we say significant, we mean big, large, substantial. I would use the adjective substantial. When they use the word significant in a scientific study, what it means to them is, like, if they say this compound, berberine, for example, that these subjects took berberine for 12 weeks and it induced a significant decrease in fasting blood sugar, a significant decrease in fasting insulin. When the scientists use the word significant, they don't mean large or substantial. They mean meaningful or relevant somewhat. And what that means is, when they say significant, it means that the thing, the outcome they saw, the lower blood sugar, the lower insulin, the good benefits, were because of the thing they did. It's because of the berberine, and not because some random confounding factor, not because of some other variable. When they say it's significant, they can tell it was because of the intervention they did, whether it's berberine or vitamin C or exercise or getting more sleep, whatever the thing is that they were studying in the subjects, the benefit or the not benefit they saw, significant increase, significant decrease, significant reduction, was because of the thing they did. The thing that we need to understand is that a significant change in a scientific study doesn't mean it's clinically relevant. It doesn't mean it's relevant in the real world to a living, breathing human being who's trying to improve their health or trying to improve whatever. So when they say there was a significant decrease in X, well, okay, X dropped a little bit. Does that matter to the actual person? For example, let's say, like I've seen so many studies with things on blood pressure that are useless, like whatever compound, whatever drug, whatever thing, let's say systolic blood pressure above what, like 120 over 80 is the normal blood pressure. So let's say your systolic blood pressure is like, I don't know, 170, like something crazy. I don't even know, that might be like dead, but just for example, let's say you have hypertension, your systolic blood pressure is 170. Holy crap. You take their drug intervention or their supplement, and after 8 weeks, your systolic blood pressure is 166. So it's dropped 4 points. The study could say there was a significant reduction in blood pressure, meaning your blood pressure dropped 4 points, and we know it was because of the medication we gave you. Okay, it's significant in that they can rule out all the other confusing factors and say that that little drop was because of the drug. To the scientific authors, that's significant. To you and me, someone who has a systolic blood pressure of 170 and now it's 166, that is absolutely meaningless. It is a garbage result. That drug is not worth taking, because at 166, you are still practically dead. You still have a raging hypertension, right? So that's just an example of the difference between something being significant in a scientific study and something being relevant in the real world, or what like a practicing doctor or nutritionist would say is clinically relevant. The beautiful thing about the Berberine studies I've seen is that not only are the results significant, they are actually clinically, therapeutically, meaningfully relevant to the patient or client in the real world. And before I forget, I am a nutritionist, not a doctor, so this is not medical advice. If I ever say the word patient, I'm talking about it in the context of someone else who is a doctor. I have to use the word client because I don't work with patients, I have clients. Okay, let's just leave our lawyers out of this, shall we? So let's take a closer look at Berberine. I printed out a lot of stuff. I'll put a whole bunch of links down below in the notes for this video. Links to the research. I mean, some of you probably don't care. You don't want to read the scientific studies. Some of you might be really interested. Now, I've written blog posts for this company about Berberine. I think here's just a weird little note, and I'll put this in the notes as well. The company that I write for had a transition of their website a few years back, and for some weird reason that nobody can figure out or fix, all of the articles that were posted on their website prior to that transition are available. You can read them. For some reason, all of the commas disappeared. There's no commas in the entire article, in many of these articles. I love commas. I probably use too many of them, but anyway, if you try, I'm going to link to one of the articles I wrote about Berberine, and it's one of the ones that I think is missing commas. If it's not, then ignore this, but if it's missing the commas, just know that it might be hard to read. If you want to read it, you're just going to have to try to make sense of it without the commas. Now, also, before I get into the awesome details of the studies, let me talk for a minute about who I think could use Berberine, who doesn't really need it, and why. Berberine was huge on the low-carb keto scene a couple of years ago. Like some people were actually making their own Berberine, like some of the doctors were having their own private label. It was really popular, and then you don't really hear anything about it anymore. I don't know why, because it's good stuff. But Berberine, just like any other supplement, because it is a supplement, just like any other supplement, is just that. It is supplemental to your healthy diet and lifestyle. And I will link, I did a video on supplements a few weeks ago. Your diet should be doing the heavy lifting for you in terms of either maintaining your health or getting you back to good health. Your diet and maybe lifestyle factors, maybe some physical activity, maybe getting proper sleep, getting fresh air, whatever it is, that stuff should be the primary factor influencing any change. Supplements can help a little. I take plenty of supplements myself. I'm not opposed to supplements. But if you think that you can eat a garbage diet, if you think that you can eat a standard Western diet and never sleep and never move, and just take some Berberine and this is going to magically make you healthy, that ain't the way it works. So I think berberine should just be like supplemental or just augment the good things you're already doing. It's a discussion you will have to have with your doctor if you're taking metformin as to whether you can maybe transition from metformin to berberine. You know, they might be skeptical, but if they see some of this research, I think they'd be pretty impressed. But, you know, as always, don't change your medication yourself. Don't stop any medication. Don't change your dose without, you know, supervision from your doctor. But I think if you're on metformin and it's working and you're happy and you like it and you're not having any weird side effects, keep taking the metformin. Again, I'm not a doctor, but most of the medical doctors I know who specialize in low carb and keto will keep people on metformin for a while. Even, let's say the blood sugar is getting much better, everything's getting much better. So they stop the insulin for a while, I mean, pretty quickly. And that's, of course, I'm talking about type 2 diabetes. If I ever just say diabetes, know that I mean type 2 unless I specify that it's type 1. So for their type 2 diabetics, they'll stop the insulin sometimes within only a day or two if that person's responding that well to the diet. They can stop, you know, there's so many other diabetes drugs that have really, really horrible side effects. They make you gain weight, they do this, they damage your liver, God knows what this stuff does. Metformin is one of the few that they will actually tend to keep people on for a while. Maybe over time, they'll reduce that dose and get you off of it, but it's like metformin, they're not usually concerned about getting you off metformin as they are getting you off some of the other drugs. Because some of the other drugs, especially insulin, are much more prone to inducing a dangerous hypoglycemia. The low blood, metformin doesn't really do that. What else can I say? I was talking about the drugs. And, if you're already doing a low carb or ketogenic diet, and your blood sugars are great, you don't have a lot of high blood sugar, you don't need berberine. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like that's, I really truly believe in that saying. I get a lot of clients coming to me asking all these questions about various supplements and different things. And my answer most often is, I think you can stop taking most of that. You know, we go through compound by compound. Most people are very concerned about things they don't need to be concerned about. So again, I will say, if you are managing your blood sugar really well through diet alone or through diet and exercise or whatever, then you don't need extra help. You don't need berberine, you don't need chromium, you don't need any other thing. I would say if you have problems with blood sugar, maybe it's diet, you know, there's a lot of people with type 2 diabetes that don't take medication. You might just have like a mild case, so to speak. Your blood sugar isn't like in the 300s and 400s, but it's higher than normal. You might not even be taking any medication. You might be trying to manage it solely through diet and lifestyle. If you are not quite able to stick to the things you know you need to stick to get the blood sugar control, to get the insulin control, to get everything better, then I think there's a place for something like berberine, because you're kind of on the cusp, maybe like you're low carb, but you really need to be a little lower than you're just capable of being or than you want to be, which, no judgment. This is a zero judgment zone. There's plenty of things I should do with my own diet and lifestyle that I'm not doing. So I have zero position to judge. So again, just to state it clearly, if you are not able or willing to stick to the things that you know would help if you stuck to them, then I would do the best you can with those things. Stick to keto or low carb as best you can and take the berberine. But again, don't expect the berberine to save you. Don't expect the berberine to correct for the donuts you're eating every day or for the cookie you're having 4 times a week. You know, it doesn't work that way. It's just a little help on top of the good stuff you're already doing. Okay, now that all that is said, what the hell is berberine? Berberine is like what we could call a phytochemical. Phyto meaning it comes from a plant. There are numerous different plants that they can get berberine from, but the word berberine, the name, comes from a plant whose botanical scientific name is Berberis aristata. So Berberis is the genus, aristata the species. So berberine comes from that. I think it's like golden seal or Chinese skullcap. Don't quote me on that, but it's various plants have berberine in them. And you know, there's a lot of plant compounds that have what we could call a pharmacological effect, almost like a medicinal effect, when you isolate the compound and extract it and really, really refine and concentrate it. And that's true for berberine. It's true for something like resveratrol or curcumin or ginseng or any of these. Well, I guess ginseng is the whole root, right? Any of these compounds that are like fractions of a whole plant molecule. It's the one little compound that has this biological effect. And frankly, there's a lot of pharmaceutical medications that are based on this principle. Aspirin is salicylic acid, and it comes from willow bark. It comes from willow bark. I think it's like synthetic now, but that's where it was first discovered. I think there were Native Americans that would like chew willow bark or make willow bark tea, and it was a pain reliever. So, even modern medicine and conventional pharmaceuticals take advantage of this fact that there might be one little compound that when you really refine the heck out of it, boom, it does something really powerful in the body. Now, what does berberine do? Well, let me gather my thoughts here. Okay. Berberine does a lot of good things. It doesn't just lower blood sugar. That's one of the things it does. Based on the scientific studies, it appears to lower fasting blood glucose. It improves your blood glucose response after a meal or like after a glucose tolerance test. It improves insulin, meaning it lowers your insulin level. It improves insulin sensitivity. So for any given blood glucose level, you need less insulin to control that. That's what improving insulin sensitivity means. Like, let's say your blood glucose is 80 and your insulin is 25 versus having a blood glucose of 80 and an insulin of 4. Same blood glucose, but you require much, much less insulin to keep it there. So it does that. It tends to raise HDL just a tiny bit, lowers total cholesterol if you care about that, lowers triglycerides. It does all this awesome stuff. And it's antimicrobial, which maybe I'll talk about that later. Sorry, I'm going to have to pause here and look at this stuff. So, okay, a couple of different ways that it works. I think they're not even certain, but based on like rat studies and rodent models and studies in humans, here's the different things that appear to happen, and then we'll talk about some of the numbers, because the numbers are going to knock your socks off. One of the things that it does is increases insulin receptor activity. So if you have a cell, in order to get glucose into the cell, now not all cells need insulin to get glucose in. In certain cells, glucose can just float right in. So we're talking about cells now that do require insulin. So your cell, there's glucose all swimming in the bloodstream. We got to get this glucose into the cell. In order to get the glucose into the cell, and it responds to insulin, the receptor for insulin has to be moved from inside the cell to the surface of the cell. If the insulin receptor is at the surface, now the insulin floating around latches onto that insulin receptor, and there's a cascade that, okay, insulin binds to the receptor, now the glucose entry point opens, the glucose transporter. I don't want to get too geeky, but that's what happens. The docking of the insulin to its receptor is what signals the cell to allow the glucose in. And it appears that, and this was done in human patients, not rats, berberine massively increases insulin receptor activity, like the presence of those insulin receptors. Guess what? More insulin receptors probably means that you need less insulin to have the effect, because there's more receptors to be able to take, to bind to that insulin. You don't have to overwhelm the cell with tons and tons of insulin because there's plenty of receptors. They just need a little bit each. That's probably oversimplifying, but that's one mechanism. And you can maybe see this, maybe not. There's pink lines and there's blue lines. The pink line is, let me check, I think the pink line is blood glucose. It must be. Yes, all the pink lines are blood glucose and all the blue lines are insulin receptor activity. So you can see all the pink lines are going down. the blood glucose is going down, going down, going down, going down, and all the blue lines are going up. All the blue lines are going up. So there's more and more insulin receptors, and it helps bring the blood sugar down. So that's pretty cool, first of all. And that is fasting. That's the fasting blood sugar level. And it's 60 days. That was a two-month treatment. So within 60 days, it does that. So that's one mechanism. Another mechanism is that berberine, like I said, it's antimicrobial. It's used sometimes in antimicrobial protocols when someone has like a parasite or a bacterial overgrowth or whatever. It's not the strongest one available, but it does have antimicrobial properties. And there might be something, well, okay, besides being antimicrobial, it inhibits intestinal disaccharidases. And this is like my nerdiest video in a long time, but intestinal disaccharide is like a two sugar. So it inhibits the enzymes in your small intestine that break down carbohydrates and sugars. And if you're inhibiting those digestive enzymes, then guess what? You don't absorb a lot of that glucose, or maybe you absorb it a lot more slowly. And so if you're inhibiting the breakdown and absorption of that glucose, then your blood glucose is going to be lower, right? You're going to have a much lower response to, again, that after meal glucose. It's called postprandial. That's the fancy scientific word for after a meal. Now, what I don't know is, what's the long-term effect of that? Like, if you're inhibiting the digestion of those starches and sugars, and it's not 100%, it's not like you're not absorbing any, you're just absorbing less than you might without the berberine, where is it going? Are you pooping it out? Are you peeing it out? It's not disappearing. So I have concerns over, like, okay, where did it go? Because if you know, there's a new class of drugs called an SGLT2 inhibitor, and I won't get too geeky, but those drugs inhibit the renal absorption of glucose, or renal whatever. It passes more glucose out through your urine. So your urine is super saturated with glucose, and guess what? The fun little side effect of these drugs are, or is, like the side effect is, necrotizing of the genitals. Basically, it rots your genitals. It rots your penis. It rots your vagina. There's something called Fournier's gangrene, a gangrene, rotting tissue flesh in your genitalia. Not something you want. So it's not the same mechanism. Berberine does not have the same mechanism as that, so don't get scared. But if you're not absorbing as much glucose, where's it going? And what are the consequences? Don't know. Okay, 27 minutes. I gotta get back to business. So oddly enough, there's also a diabetes drug called acarbose, ACARBOSE. Some of you might even be on it or have been on it in the past. Acarbose has that same mechanism. It inhibits the activity of some of those carbohydrate-digesting enzymes. And again, it lowers blood sugar. But I feel like I was saying before, I feel the same way about berberine does a lot of other things besides inhibit those enzymes. Acarbose really just inhibits the enzymes. And so in my opinion, if you could stick faithfully to a low-carb or ketogenic diet, you don't need acarbose, right? If you're not eating all that sugar and starch in the first place, you don't have to worry about inhibiting the enzymes that are breaking it down and digesting it. So I think acarbose is like unnecessary if you are able to adhere strictly to a low-carb or ketogenic diet. If you can't, and again, zero judgment, if you have trouble sticking to low carb, hopefully you're doing it 80% of the time, maybe not 100%. If you have trouble being as strict as you know you need to, that might be a time and place for acarbose and or berberine. Anyway, of course, not a doctor, not medical advice. But berberine, so that's one of the mechanisms. And oddly enough, I don't think I've done a video, but I'll link to a very, very long blog post I did on vinegar. Vinegar does the same thing. Vinegar inhibits some of those enzymes. And I noticed that when I take vinegar, Like I love vinegar, like balsamic, apple cider, red wine vinegar. You name the vinegar, I love it and I use it. And a lot of condiments, every condiment that you love has vinegar in it. Mustard, ketchup, sriracha, hot sauce, mayonnaise. Guess what they all have? Vinegar. And so vinegar is known to be really good for blood sugar. Jason Fung has written a blog post or two on this. I'll see if I can find that and link to it. So it doesn't have to come from me. It can come from a medical doctor. So there is something to be said for reducing the activity of some of those enzymes. And I'm trying to think, berberine does a couple of other things. It upregulates the LDL receptor also. So just like it makes more insulin receptors, it makes more receptors for LDL cholesterol, which that could be a whole separate 20 videos on its own, the cholesterol thing. If you're concerned about LDL, which I personally am not, but that's one of the mechanisms by which it lowers total cholesterol and LDL, is that it makes more LDL receptors. Guess what? More receptors means more opportunity, more likelihood that LDL will be taken out of the bloodstream into the cells. Okay, now let's look at the numbers because we are 30 minutes in. So let me, I had to spend some time like converting the numbers because it's in millimolar units. So if you are watching this overseas and your country uses molar units, you know, we're in the US here, we use the milligrams per deciliter or whatever. If you are watching me from overseas, thank you. That's awesome. I love that I have people all over the world watching these videos. And so I don't want to leave anybody out, so I'm going to use both units so everybody knows the magnitude of the changes we're talking about here. Okay. First, there was a study, a 13-week study. So, you know, what is that? Three months or so? Yeah, a little more than 3 months of newly diagnosed type 2 diabetics. And they diet alone. Okay, for the first 2 months of the study, they did diet alone. They only were using diet, no medication, because they're newly diagnosed. After those first 2 months of run-in period, they added berberine or metformin. There were two groups of people. One group took berberine, one group took metformin. Same exact dose, which doesn't really matter because just depending on the compound, doses could be very different. But they took 500 milligrams of berberine 3 times a day, so a total of 1,500 milligrams. Same exact dose of metformin, 500 milligrams 3 times a day. I'm going to share a detail. I don't know what it means, but they said it, and I don't know what the relevance is, but here it is anyway. Maybe one of you knows the relevance. They gave the berberine before meals, and they gave the metformin after meals. I don't know why, and I don't know if that affected. They didn't say. They didn't explain why, so that kind of sucks, but that's just a gee whiz piece of information. But here's what happened. In the berberine group, the starting A1C was 9.47, and any number I give you is the average, the mean. So some people were a little bit higher, some people were a little bit lower. These are the means. Baseline A1C, 9.47. That's pretty high. I've heard much higher, but that's pretty high. The end point after 13 weeks, A1C is 7.48, so it's come down 2 full percentage points. Now, 7.48 A1C, guess what? You are still diabetic. That's still pretty bad, but it's a hell of a lot better than 9.47, isn't it? Fasting blood glucose. For you molar unit people, their fasting blood glucose at the start was 10.63. For you Americans and whoever else uses the milligrams, it was 191 fasting blood glucose. After the 13-week study, molar units, 6.85 was the blood glucose. In American units, 123. So just to let the magnitude of the change, it was a 35% decrease. So remember I said at the very beginning of this crazy long video, that is a statistically significant decrease, but it is also very, very clinically real-world relevant to a person walking around living with type 2 diabetes, right? If you go from a fasting blood sugar of 191 to 123, pretty darn good. 123 is a little high, but for someone that started out with 191, it's great. And there's a lot of people in the keto and low-carb world that are perfectly healthy and fit that will have an elevated, that will have a fasting blood glucose in the 120s. And there's a lot of reasons why that I won't get into, but my point is, pretty darn good. That's a big change. Again, for you molar people, 10.6 down to 6.8. Pretty huge change. The postprandial, meaning after a meal, they did not specify whether this was after food or after an oral glucose tolerance test. It just says postprandial, and that bugs me that it's not specified, but either way, still good, useful information to have. After the meal, you molar, here's the, at the beginning of the study and then 13 weeks later, molar units, 19.8 blood sugar down to 11. For you Americans like me or you milligram people, after meal blood sugar, 357. 357 at the beginning of the study down to 199. 199 after you eat, still kind of high, way better than 357, right? That is a 45% decrease. Again, not just statistically significant in their study, but hugely, hugely impactful in the real world. Let's look at triglycerides. Their starting triglycerides were not that high, especially for people with type 2 diabetes. You molar people, millimoles per liter, it was 1.13 at the beginning, went down to 0.89. So, pretty good decrease. For us Americans, our little milligram units, the triglycerides were 100, which not really that high. I was actually surprised that it was that low in a group of diabetics. 100 down to 79. Anything under 100 for triglycerides is pretty good, especially these people weren't even eating a low-carb diet. They were eating their normal crap diet and taking berberine. And so that is a 20% decrease. And, we in the sort of low-carb world, forward-thinking world, don't really put a whole lot of stock in the total cholesterol or the LDL. We like to look at the ratio of triglycerides to HDL. And we want triglycerides on sort of the low side, HDL on the high side. And so let's look at what happened to the ratio. So we just said that the triglycerides came down about 20%. HDL did not change that much. It changed a little bit. For you molar people, it was 1.33 at the beginning down to 1.22. Not a huge change. For us Americans, HDL was 51 down to 47. Whoop-de-doo, a little 4-point change. But the ratio, because the triglycerides came down so much, even if the HDL barely changed, the ratio went from 1.9 to 1.6. Pretty good. I mean, that's not a huge change, but anything under 2 is great. There's a lot of us in the keto world whose triglyceride to HDL is actually less than 1. Like it's 0 point something. Mine is almost like 0.5 or something. It's almost like 0.5. But you'll hear a lot of people say that kind of anything under 2 is pretty good. So for them to be at 1.6 is pretty good. And remember, there was no change to their diet. They were already doing whatever diet they were prescribed, or normal diet, for the first 2 months. Then they added the berberine. And I also have to say, I'm only giving you the berberine figures because you can just believe me when I say, I'm going to link to the study anyway, that these results were as good as the results the people on metformin got. In some cases, they're better. In some cases, berberine had a bigger improvement in some of this stuff than metformin. So that's pretty great. Now they did have, there are some side effects. Metformin, I think, sometimes causes diarrhea and causes GI upset, probably because it's antimicrobial and it kind of messes with the gut bacteria. I don't like to talk about the gut biome. I'm kind of a biome skeptic, if you will, but I can't deny the fact that metformin sometimes messes you up. Metformin also has the potential to result in a vitamin B12 deficiency, because I think it messes with some of that absorption. I don't really know the mechanism, but if you take metformin, you should have your vitamin B12 level measured regularly. Now that I've said that, incidence of gastrointestinal adverse events was 34.5% during the 13 weeks of berberine treatment. So included diarrhea. 6 people had diarrhea, 4 people had constipation, so it could go either way, too loose or not loose enough. 11 people had flatulence, 2 people had abdominal pain. The adverse effects were observed only in the first 4 weeks in most patients. And then they reduced the dose a little bit. There were a couple of people that went down from 500 milligrams 3 times a day to 300 milligrams 3 times a day, and they went away. So, and I guess as people adjusted, all those symptoms seemed to go anyway. It says they were observed only in the first 4 weeks. We're treated metformin, all right, carbos, berberine. Okay. Now, berberine. Okay, the same study, is it the same? In the same paper, they reported on a different study of people that had, so that was newly diagnosed type 2 diabetics. Same paper, they reported on a different study of subjects who had type 2 diabetes for a much longer period of time. And these people are medicated, including insulin, I think. I'm not sure. I'd have to reread this. See, this is why I wanted to take so long to get this, because I wanted to like make notes. I don't remember if any of these people were on insulin or not. But they were already on medication, and their type 2 diabetes was still terribly, not well controlled. So these people, let's see, A1C. Oh, this is berberine in combination therapy. So this is adding berberine to the medication these people were already taking. So the baseline numbers, the beginning numbers I'm going to give you, again, they're an average. Some people were higher, some people were lower. But these mean numbers here are with these people already taking medication for diabetes. Some of them multiple medications. Yeah, now that I remember. Some of them were on insulin. Some of them were on metformin. Some were on like sulfonylurea drugs, TZD drugs, these different classes of diabetes meds. So even on medication, some of them on multiple medication, these were still the average numbers. Fast A1C was 8.1. This was also a 13-week study, down to 7.3 by the end. Again, 7.3 is still pretty bad for A1C, but better than 8.1. Fasting blood glucose, you molar people started at 9.6, end of the study 7.6. Pretty good change. For us Americans, the start, they had fasting blood sugar of 172 down to 136. That is a 21% decrease just from adding berberine to the medication regimen these people were already following. No change in diet. They weren't doing low carb, they weren't doing keto. Just the berberine alone impacted fasting blood glucose to the tune of a 21% decrease. Postprandial, meaning after the meal, these people had a glucose of 14.8 millimoles per liter down to 9.7 millimoles per liter. I mean, 14.8, holy crap, you guys, right? In American milligram per deciliter, the after meal glucose 266, and after the 13 weeks after a meal, 174. 174, still kind of SHITTY, but that is a 35% decrease. And again, they don't say if it was food, they don't say if it was an oral glucose tolerance test. I'm hoping it was an oral glucose tolerance test, because if it was just a meal, then did they have the same exact food? Was it the exact, like, we don't know. I'm hoping it was a glucose tolerance test, but either way, it's the data that we have, right? Fasting insulin. I don't think, did we have fasting insulin in these people? We did. Did I talk about that? You know what? I don't think I got, oh, we did. The previous study, fasting insulin at the beginning was 29. Talk about that in a second. At the end of the study, it went down to 24. So that's a small decrease, not that huge a decrease, but fasting insulin of 29 is, as we say in Spanglish, no bueno. Depending on the lab that you use or the site you look at online, various different laboratories will tell you that a fasting insulin under either, some labs will put the cutoff at 25, some will put it at 20, but anything under that is normal. No. Most of us in the low carb and keto world like it to be under 10, and under 5 is even better. And let me just make sure it's the right units, because it's micro micro units or micro international units per milliliter. I think most places use that, even outside the US, but if your country uses some other unit, I apologize, I did not make the conversion on that. But when I say 25 or 20, it's micro units or micro international units per mil. So like I said, we like to see it under 10. Under 5 is even better. If you're in the double digits, if you're at 29, you are in serious, serious trouble. And remember, that's the fasting level. That's the fasting level. That's not the level after you eat a bagel and drink a glass of orange juice. God knows what your insulin is then. So, did they do the postprandial insulin? They did, but I don't know what's considered normal for post-meal insulin, so I'm not going to go there. Okay, the other study talked about the glucose. Their fasting insulin was even worse. Their fasting insulin at the beginning, now remember though, these are people that have had type 2 diabetes for a lot longer than that first study. Fasting insulin, 35. Holy mudja that is bad. After the end of the 13 weeks, down to 25. And again, fasting insulin of 25, still well into the danger zone, but better than 35. That is a decrease of 29%. 29% decrease, pretty good. HOMA-IR. Now, I have a dear friend who has obesity. He's not diabetic. His blood sugar is normal. It's usually normal. His A1C was like 5.2. And his endocrinologist was puzzled why he couldn't lose weight. He's got a very, very big middle section. He's got some stuff going on. And he knows that he needs to do keto. He knows it works for him. He just has a really hard time sticking to it. Anyway, this friend of mine was like talking to me, showing me some of his numbers. And, I'm looking at the blood glucose and I know what he's telling me. And I said, listen, you have to get your insulin tested. Ask your doctor for an insulin test. He gets the insulin test. You know what the fasting insulin was? 32. And I said, dear friend, that is your problem right there. That's why you're not diabetic. You are not diagnosed with type 2 diabetes because your blood sugar is normal. Your blood sugar is only normal because that super sky high insulin is keeping it in check. I talk about this all the time. I've written like a 9-part blog series because this is the single biggest thing, and that's not an exaggeration. In my opinion, this is the single biggest thing being missed in conventional medicine right now, because chronically high insulin is either the major cause, outright cause of, or the factor that makes worse. PCOS, hypertension, it affects migraines, skin tags, gout, makes it really, really hard to lose weight no matter how hard you exercise. I'm trying to think, I wrote a whole book about how chronically high insulin affects Alzheimer's disease. Anyway, the list goes on and on. In people whose blood sugar is normal. It's the high insulin creating all that. We have a whole chapter on that in the book that I just finished with the Keto MD that we hope to have out in the fall. Okay, so I don't mean to harp on the insulin, but it's a really big deal, because the next thing we're talking about is HOMA-IR, H-O-M-A, Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. And what this is it's a mathematical formula that involves your fasting blood glucose and your fasting insulin. So this is a much, much nicer indicator than fasting glucose, because like I said at the beginning, let's say your fasting glucose is 80. Well, great, that's great. But is your insulin 34 to keep that blood glucose at 80, or is your fasting insulin 2? Same blood glucose, very different insulin. This is what HOMA-IR tells us. We like to see HOMA-IR less than 1. Less than 1, like 0 point something, is considered optimal, considered best metabolic health. Anything above 2.9, and some doctors would even say above 2.5 or 2.7, is bad, bad metabolic news. So the HOMA-IR on these people at the beginning of the study, you ready for this, guys? 15! 15! This is crazy, crazy, raging, out of control hyperinsulinemia. And we know it is because their fasting insulin was 30-5. 13 weeks into the study at the end, HOMA-IR is 8.4. just like all the other changes, 8.4 still sucks as a HOMA-IR. You are still in very dangerous metabolic territory, but 8.4 is a heck of a lot better than 15.2. That is a 46% reduction just by taking berberine. And remember, that fasting insulin of 35 and the fasting glucose of 172, these people were already taking medication for diabetes and their numbers were still that terrible. That's how bad these diabetes medications are. They don't do a whole lot for you. Now imagine if these people did a ketogenic diet, but this wasn't a ketogenic diet study, it's a berberine study. The berberine alone improved HOMA-IR by 46%. I mean, this is nuts. This is, you don't see this with any supplement. You don't even see this with medications usually. So triglycerides also came down very nicely, a little bit. You millimolar people at the start, 1.73, at the end, 1.49. Us other people at the beginning, triglycerides 153. Again, not that high. Some people with really bad metabolic problems, their triglycerides could be 500, 800. So 153, at the end of the study, 132. Not a huge decrease, but 14% decrease. HDL went, did HDL go down? Oh, HDL went down a little bit. That's interesting. But the ratio, remember I talked about that triglyceride to HDL ratio. The HDL actually went down a very, very small amount. It was 52.9 to 51.04, so barely budged. 1.37 millimolar to 1.32 millimole, barely moved. But because the triglycerides came down so much, that ratio went from 3 to 2.5. Not a huge change, but movement in the right direction for sure. Now, do we have one more study coming up on 51 minutes? This is my longest one in a while. This is a separate study of people with type 2 diabetes that were taking various medications, I think. Now, this study protocol was, it was 2 months. It called for 2 months of time. You know what? This is the 60-day study with the insulin receptors that I showed earlier. These subjects had type 2 diabetes, and they were instructed to stop all their medication for at least 2 weeks before the start of the study. So they were medicated in the past, but in the 2 weeks before the study, they were off all medication. And then they got randomized to receive either berberine, metformin, or rosiglitazone, which is another diabetes drug. So, some of the subjects took nothing else, no other medication, just the berberine or just the metformin or just the rosiglitazone. And this berberine dose was 1 gram a day, 500 milligrams twice a day. The metformin was 750 milligrams twice a day, so 1.5 grams per day. The rosiglitazone is a 4 milligrams. I'm not really that familiar with the dosing of that drug, so whatever, that probably a standard dose. I'm only giving you these numbers because some of you out there might be taking metformin, so I just want you to know what is the dose these people were even taking. But anyway, let's talk about the berberine. Fasting blood glucose in these people, millimoles 10.4. No, sorry, 10.4. And after 2 months, 7.7. That's a pretty good decrease. So in milligrams per deciliter, fasting blood glucose at the start, 187, down to 138. And again, 138, not so great for fasting glucose, but that's a heck of a lot better than 187. It's a 25% decrease. Not just significant in the study, but clinically, real world, relevant, important. And let's see, the A1C, before the start of the study, 8.3 down to 6.8. 6.8, not that great, better than 8.3. That's a 20% decrease. Triglycerides come down 17% from 1.7 millimoles to 1.4 millimoles, or in our American units, 150 to 124. So a 17% decrease with nothing else but berberine. I mean, I remember reading this like, holy crap. That's really impressive for a supplement, for something that you can get over the counter. You don't need a prescription for it. So I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. Do you need berberine? I don't know. Do you? Never stop medications without medical supervision. Never change your dose or stop your dose. In my opinion, as a nutritionist who sort of specializes in blood sugar and insulin kind of stuff, if it were me, I would have a sip of wine. If it were me, I would not take Berberine just to take it as an insurance policy, because I could just take it now if I wanted to. I think I would probably take it in the circumstance that I've mentioned throughout the video. If I wasn't quite able to stick to low carb as strictly as I know I need to really get my blood sugar controlled, then I would take Berberine as a little helper. Not to take away the need for the diet. It's not like, well, I can eat all the carbs I want because I take Berberine. It's not like, that's what doctors say with insulin, carb up and shoot up, just eat the carbs and cover it with insulin. That's a whole separate issue. Berberine is not to be used to like cover up your carb sins. It's just a little helper. Because there are people, you could be doing keto, doing low carb really, really well, and for some reason your blood sugar is just a little bit stubborn. There's always a reason. There's always maybe multiple things that you could look at that might be interfering. But if you are not able to identify those, or if you are able to identify them and you're at a point in life where you can't do something about it, it could be your stress, it could be whatever, then I think like you're doing keto, you're doing low carb, you can't resist the carbs every now and then, and that's, again, no judgment. I think take the Berberine to just be a little bit of a leg up, It's not an excuse to eat carbs. It's not a substitute for the low carb diet. I guess that's the main point I want to make, and the most eloquent way to say it is Berberine is not a substitute for a low carb diet. Just like insulin is not a substitute, metformin is not a substitute, rosiglitazone, liraglutide, blah blah, Byetta, Januvia, whatever else diabetic medications are out there. None of them are a substitute for just not putting so much glucose into your body in the first place. You don't have to worry about peeing it out or getting rid of it or controlling it or inhibiting the enzymes that digest it if you are not consuming it in the first place. So, if I had type 2 diabetes and if I had trouble controlling it, and if I talked to my doctor about it, and if I got the okay from my medical professional, if I got the okay from my doctor and I knew it was safe for me to take, I'd probably take it. I wouldn't take it by myself. I wouldn't just take it willy-nilly. Okay, that being said, just shy of an hour here. If you are interested in Berberine, like I said, the company I write for, the reason I even learned all this stuff and read all these studies, we do have a Berberine product. It's a special formulation that is supposedly more bioavailable and more easily absorbed. Berberine is not a compound that is typically very easy to absorb in a supplement form. The way they process it or produce it or whatever is shown to be a little more accessible to the body. So I'll put a link down below. If you're interested in that particular Berberine, you can buy it using that link, or you don't have to. You don't have to take Berberine. You don't have to buy it from my link, but someone asked me to do a video on Berberine, so here we are, and I'm weirdly impressed, because I gotta tell you, this is my career. This is what I do for my primary living, is read these studies and write about them and make some like technical scientific documents out of what the research shows, and rarely do I find results as impressive as I see with Berberine. Like I said at the beginning, with that like statistical significance in a scientific study, the significant drop in blood pressure of 3 whopping points, the significant increase in bone mass of 1%, for some osteoporosis drug. Like so many drugs are just, I wouldn't say they're useless, but they have such a mild effect that is blown all out of proportion in the ads and in the pharmaceutical pamphlets. Oh, this drug will change your life. I really was oddly taken by berberine, like just wow, you know. Let me see if there's anything I missed. Probably not. I can't imagine I missed anything talking for 59.5 minutes. So thank you for watching. If you have questions, if you want to, you know, get some more personalized help regarding berberine or regarding low carb or ketogenic diets, I do consultations. I will put a link down, but you can go to my website, toitnutrition.com. There's a tab that says work with me. You can read about how to do that. And that's it. I hope this was educational, probably a little too educational for some of you, but I'll see you next time. Don't forget to check out my book, The Stall Slayer, stallslayer.com. Until next time, cheers. You have a good day.